I lied to save my daughter from a demon, only to become the demon in her eyes. There are regrets that are not just etched into memory, but that silently shape a person's entire life. My name is Karen, and I carry a story that has never been told, a truth I have buried for the past 30 years. It is the greatest regret of my life, not because of a mistake, but because of a conscious choice. I accepted becoming a terrible mother in my daughter's eyes, so that she could live. For 30 years, Blanche has lived in hatred, and I have lived in the silence of a truth that no one knows. Now, as death draws near, I understand it is time to say everything, starting with that fateful day at the airport. But to understand that fateful day, to understand why I had no other choice, you have to go back even further. You have to start with Richard. After Blanche's father and I separated, life wasn't just difficult. It was a long and drawn-out battle. I remember the smell of bleach on my cheap nurse's uniform, the feeling of exhaustion coming home from my second shift at midnight, only to find my daughter asleep at her desk. The worry about money was a constant weight. I married Richard because I was tired of fighting that battle. I did not love him, but he promised peace. And I did it for Blanche. I wanted her to have a comfortable bed, a future not burdened by her mother's bills. At first, that trade-off seemed like a miracle. Our house always smelled of oak and fresh flowers. Richard bought me silk dresses, and he sent Blanche to a prestigious private school. I watched my daughter, happy in her new uniform, and I told myself that I had done the right thing. I had accepted the sacrifice of love in exchange for security. But the gilded cage began to tighten, little by little. First, it was my friends. One day, my best friend Sarah came to visit. Richard was coldly polite. He sat there, saying nothing, just staring in a way that made our conversation awkward. After Sarah left, Richard said nonchalantly, "I don't like the way she looks at you. She looks cheap." He said something similar about every one of my friends, until no one called anymore. Then, it was the money. "Just use my card," he had said at the beginning. But soon, every expense was scrutinized. "A new book? You haven't finished the old ones yet." I did not have a single dollar to call my own. I became a doll in his house, fed, clothed, and completely dependent. But that was just discomfort. The real horror began when Blanche turned 14. She started to blossom, changing from a little girl into a young woman. And I started to notice. It was the looks. At the dinner table, while Blanche was excitedly telling a story from school, I would look up and catch Richard staring at her. It was not the gaze of a stepfather. It was intense, scrutinizing, and there was a dark possessiveness in it. When he saw me looking, his expression would instantly return to normal. But I had already seen it. It was the questions. "Blanche, does that boy Tom ever hold your hand?" he would ask offhandedly while I was cooking. Boys at school are very forward these days. Those questions, taken on their own, might have seemed like concern. But they came too frequently, with a curiosity that was morbid. And then, there were the touches. I remember one time Blanche was trying to reach a box on the top kitchen shelf. Richard came up from behind her, saying, "Let me help." That self-deception came to an end on a Tuesday evening. I was going downstairs for a glass of water when I heard Richard's voice coming from his study. The door was slightly ajar, and he was on the phone, sounding cheerful. I stopped, hiding behind the wall when I heard him mention Blanche's name. What I heard next will haunt me for the rest of my life. He was not talking. He was bragging. Bragging to some friend about his wife's pretty little daughter. He used words that a father should never be allowed to think, let alone speak. His tone was a sick mixture of smugness and filthy desire as he described her. I stood there, my hand gripping the cold stair railing. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze. My entire world collapsed in a matter of seconds. My daughter was living under the same roof as a monster. The most devastating moment passed, giving way to a cold clarity. A few weeks later, Richard delivered the final blow. At the dinner table, he cheerfully announced a vacation to Bali. Then he looked at me, a smirk on his lips but not in his eyes. "This trip is for our family to get closer," he said, emphasizing the last word. He paused, just long enough for me to feel the weight of his next words. If Blanche comes along, I will have plenty of time to educate her. It would be best for you to leave her at home. It was not a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. I understood his hidden meaning instantly. He was backing me into a corner, giving me two choices, both of which were hell. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the darkness, panic squeezing my chest. I could not fight Richard openly. He had money, lawyers, and connections. If I accused him, he would easily paint a picture of me as a hysterical, paranoid wife. No one would believe me. I was completely trapped. And then, in that utter desperation, an idea came to me. A crazy and terrible idea. But it was the only way out. If I could not openly take her away, then I had to make her run away on her own. I had to hurt her. I had to do something so cruel. Something that would make her never want to see my face again. Something that would make her hate me to her very core. I had to become the villain in my own daughter's story. I had to push her away. Push her toward the only safe place I knew she could go. The arms of her biological father. The plan was set. The hardest part was putting it into action. The airport was noisy and cold. Fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floor. And the announcements for flights droned on. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid she could hear it. Blanche stood in front of me, excited, clutching her ticket and passport. She was saying something about the beaches in Bali, but I could not hear her. All of my concentration was on keeping my face expressionless. On the outside, I was a block of ice. On the inside, I was shattering. I had rehearsed this scene in my mind 100 times, but no amount of preparation was enough for the real pain. "Mom, they're starting to call our flight," Blanche said, tugging lightly at my sleeve. This was it. It was time. I focused on a point on the wall somewhere over her shoulder. I did not dare to look into her eyes. I knew if I did, I would break down. "My flight," I said. My voice terrifyingly casual. Not ours. The excitement on Blanche's face vanished, replaced by confusion. "What are you talking about?" "My ticket is right here." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak the carefully calculated words. "I have changed my mind. I need a vacation. Alone." I looked her over, from head to toe, with a cold, appraising glance. "You are 16 years old now. It is time you took care of yourself." The confusion in her eyes gave way to a disbelieving hurt. "Take care of myself? But we made plans, Mom." Her voice began to tremble. I shrugged, the most indifferent gesture I could manage. In reality, I was fighting to keep my own shoulders from trembling. The pain in my chest was as sharp as a knife. "Plans change," I replied curtly. The act had to continue. The wound had to be deep enough. I reached into my purse, my hand trembling, but I forced it to be steady. I pulled out 4 $50 bills. $200. Not too much, not too little. Enough to survive, but also enough to be an insult. "Take this," I said, my voice flat, shoving the bills into her trembling hand. "This is enough for you to get a taxi to your father's house." Tears began to stream down Blanche's cheeks. "Mom, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Mom, please don't do this to me." Her voice broke on a desperate sob. Every one of her words was like a knife stabbing my heart. Every cell in my body was screaming to hold her, to tell her the truth. But I could not. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him, Richard, standing by a pillar not far away, his arms crossed over his chest, watching silently. He was making sure I played my part in this unspoken deal. His presence gave me the final, terrible strength I needed. "I already told you," I said, my voice so cold that I barely recognized it myself. "I need my space." And then, I turned my back. I walked away as fast as I could, focusing on the sound of my shoes hitting the floor. "Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back." I repeated it in my head like a frantic mantra. I knew with absolute certainty, that if I glanced back just once, if I saw her shattered face, the entire plan would collapse. I would run back to her, and I would lose. I would be handing her over to that monster. So, I just kept walking, leaving my entire world sobbing behind me. Right there at the departure gate, the 2 weeks in Bali passed like an empty nightmare. I walked on beaches without seeing them, ate food without tasting it. Richard seemed pleased. He thought he had won. He had separated me from my daughter. He did not know that was exactly what I wanted. The day we returned, the moment the taxi stopped at the curb, I bolted from the car. I did not care about the luggage or what Richard was muttering behind me. I ran straight upstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I burst into Blanche's room. The door opened to a deathly silence. The bed was neatly made. The wardrobe stood open, empty. All of her personal belongings, every trace of her, had vanished. On the pillow, there was a folded piece of paper. My hand trembled as I unfolded it. Her handwriting, scrawled and blurred by tears. I did not need to read it all. The first 3 words were enough. I hate you. My legs gave out. I slid to the floor, the note crumpled in my fist. An absolute pain, sharp as broken glass, tore through my chest. I had lost her, forever, but weaving through that pain almost shamefully was a fragile glimmer of relief. She was gone. That meant she was safe. The plan had worked. The confrontation took place a few days later at my ex-husband's house. He had called, his voice full of rage, demanding that I come over immediately. When I walked in, he was standing there, his face red with fury. Blanche was huddled behind him, her eyes swollen but defiant. "What have you done, Karen?" My ex-husband roared. What kind of mother abandons her own child at an airport? I looked at Blanche. She looked thinner, but she was safe. She was sheltered in her father's embrace. The look in her eyes was no longer one of hurt. It was contempt. And when I saw that, I knew I had to continue the act. "It was my decision," I said, my voice cold. "She is 16. She needs to be independent." "Independent?" he shouted, unable to believe it. "She is a child." I did not respond. I just stood there, accepting every accusation, every look of hatred. I saw that my daughter was loved, protected from the monster I had married, and that strengthened my resolve. I had to be the villain. I had to be the reason she would never even think of returning to that house. I let their contempt become the fortress that protected Blanche, and I quietly accepted it as my own penance. When I returned to that house, everything had changed. With Blanche no longer the target in the house, Richard lost all interest in me. His gentlemanly facade disappeared completely, replaced by a cruelty that was no longer hidden. He began to cheat on me openly, sometimes not even bothering to come home. The silence in that large house was more terrifying than any verbal abuse. I was no longer a doll to be displayed. I was just an unnecessary shadow. The divorce was swift and cold. He threw me a small settlement, enough to keep me from starving, but it was also a final statement about my worth in his eyes. I accepted it all in silence. This was the final price for my daughter's safety. This was my penance. The rest of my life passed in loneliness and poverty. I rented a small apartment, returned to my job as a nurse, and lived an invisible life. I had no friends, no family, but I had a secret, an anonymous social media account. Under a fake name and with no pictures at all, it was the only window I had into my daughter's world. Through it, I silently watched her grow up. I saw the photo of her in a graduation gown, her smile radiant, holding her university degree. My heart ached with pride, but at the same time, a sharp pain shot through me because I was not there to hug her. I saw her on her first day of work, looking so mature and professional. I smiled to myself in my empty room. Her wedding day was the hardest. I looked at the pictures over and over again. She was so beautiful in her white wedding dress. She looked so happy. But then I saw a family photo. Her father was standing beside her, along with his new wife, smiling. They were standing in the place that should have been mine. Every one of Blanche's successes was both my greatest comfort and a knife twisting in the wound that would never heal. I had gotten what I wanted. She was safe, happy, and successful. But the price was that I could never be a part of her life again. And so I have told everything. My voice is now just a hoarse whisper, but I have spoken it all into this old tape recorder. I left out no detail about Richard's true nature, about my fear, about the desperate plan at the airport. I press the stop button. The click echoes in the quiet room, ending 30 years of silence. Beneath my pillow is a small diary, its cover worn and old. In it, I secretly recorded all of my fears, the looks, the words, the touches. It is my only proof, a silent witness to the truth. I carefully place the cassette tape and the diary into a simple cardboard box. I seal it. My old, trembling hand writes Blanche's address on top of the box, an address I have long since memorized. Below it, I write one last line, a mother's final instruction, only open when I am gone. I do not want her to have to carry the burden of this truth while I am still alive. I do not want her to have to face the difficult choice of whether or not to come see me. This truth is meant to set her free, not to bind her. Tomorrow, I will ask the nurse to mail this package. It will be my final act. I do not know how she will feel when she hears these words. I can only hope that when she hears my voice, when she turns each page of the diary, she will understand. She will understand that the hatred she has carried in her heart for 30 years was, in fact, built from my own desperate love. That is all I could ever wish for. Now, I can finally rest. 3 days later, Blanche was sitting in her kitchen, watching her own daughter practice coloring. Her life was stable, with a good husband and a job she loved. The relationship with her mother was an old, dusty chapter, a pain that had grown numb over time. When the phone rang, she answered it indifferently. A stranger's voice from a nursing home informed her that a Mrs. Karen had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Blanche thanked the caller, hung up, and stared out the window. She did not cry. She only felt a sense of emptiness, a final end to a story that, for her, had already concluded 30 years ago. That afternoon, the mail carrier delivered a cardboard box. Blanche recognized the shaky handwriting on it immediately, her mother's handwriting. And below the address, a line of text made her pause. Only open when I am gone. Her heart gave an irregular beat. She placed the box on the table, staring at it for a long time before taking a utility knife to open it. Inside, there was an old tape recorder and a small diary with a worn cloth cover. A cold feeling of curiosity began to rise. She put batteries in the machine and pressed play. A faint, familiar yet distant voice echoed through the quiet kitchen. There are regrets that do more than linger in memory, they quietly shape the course of an entire life. Blanche sat down and listened. At first, she listened with skepticism, shielded by a wall of resentment carefully built over 30 years. But then, her mother's voice went on, speaking of Richard. The golden cage, the glances, the touches, and that wall within her began to crack. When the voice on the recorder recounted the twisted phone call, a wave of nausea rose in Blanche. Her hands trembled as she opened the old diary. The yellowed pages were filled with hurried handwriting, scattered sentences, capturing a fear that grew with each passing day. The dates matched perfectly with her own memories. And then, she heard the part about the airport. From the corner of my eye, I could see him. Richard, standing by a pillar not far away, arms crossed, silently watching. The recorder slipped from Blanche's hands, falling to the floor, but the voice continued. The sound cracked, and so did her world. Everything she had built her life on, the hatred for a cruel mother, the affection for a kind stepfather, collapsed in that instant. The rage that had burned in her for 30 years did not disappear. It transformed into something heavier, far more painful, a sorrow beyond measure, regret for every cruel word, every look of disdain. Regret for 30 years her mother had lived alone with a truth no one believed. Her husband stepped into the room, finding her crumpled on the floor, eyes vacant, tears streaming down her face without her even noticing. Blanche? What's wrong? He asked, his voice full of concern. Blanche looked up at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? How could she explain that her entire life, every memory she had ever trusted, was built on a lie? That the love she had held dear had been bought with the shame of the woman she had despised most? She could only shake her head, clutching her mother's diary tightly to her chest, as if holding on to a ghost. The weak voice from the recorder still whispered through the room a late confession that had changed everything, forever.